Hi everyone, I'm Mara Webster with SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and we are here today for another one of our conversations at home. As a reminder, we are continuing to raise funds for our COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund, which is supporting SAG-AFTRA members who are currently out of work due to all of the closed film and television productions at the moment. So please check out the link below this video and consider supporting if you're able to donate in any way. I'm really thrilled today to be joined by Tobias Menzies, who many of you will know from his current work on The Crown. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tobias. I wanted to start by asking you about filming season 4, because I know that you guys were in production and then had to kind of very abruptly squash your production days together so that you could finish in time before all the shutdowns happened. So how was that experience?
Well, I mean, actually, we didn't quite finish. We're still a few weeks short. I had done my principal photography, so I was kind of finished just about 10 days before the lockdown, but the show still had about 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks left, and obviously we would normally have done, we will do some reshoots at some point, but all that has been put on ice. So yes, it's we very nearly got there, but yeah, close but no.
And then obviously you were coming into the show in season 3, and it was a very unique situation where the cast were all changing out. And I was curious how useful it was for you to look at the previous episodes, and particularly Matt Smith's performance, not just in terms of the way that he was playing Philip and the physicality and intonation in his voice, but also in kind of understanding his backstory and his motivations through your performance.
Yeah, it's a really unique thing to have, sort of 20 hours of really top level TV as sort of created for your backstory. So yeah, it was incredibly helpful. I mean, I was a real admirer of the show before being involved, or any hint of being involved. So I definitely went back and had a look at both the show and also what Matt had done, and yeah, how they had kind of, I suppose, how they looked to frame Philip, and then yeah, I looked for some clues as to then where to take him into his middle years, into a sort of different part of their marriage, I guess. But yeah, really a very expensive and rather amazing kind of a resource tool.
Yeah. I was also curious, because obviously the crew have been working on the show for a period of time, even though the cast were all new, and they must have had like a natural rhythm and flow and shorthand with each other. So how did the crew actually play into becoming a useful tool for you and the rest of the cast stepping into this world?
That's a great question. Yeah, because a lot of the camera team and the directors, or some of the directors, DOPs, a lot of that team, grips, lighting team, all those crossed over. I mean, I'm very grateful to them that they weren't kind of comparing too much. They weren't saying, oh, well, Matt wouldn't have done it like that. They were, it felt actually, in the doing, it felt like a fresh start, because we obviously had a completely new cast. We also had a new costume team and a new makeup team. So, and in a way, I think as a creative team, they were also keen to kind of wipe the slate clean to a certain extent and sort of let us start fresh and make it our own. And so, yeah, we were given plenty of scope to kind of come in and make ourselves comfortable and try, I suppose, in a way, make a new show, even though that sounds sort of contradictory in that obviously they're the same people and we're carrying on a story. But while it is a continuum, I do think that 3 feels significantly different to what had come before. I think Peter's writing changes a bit. The story becomes maybe a little weightier, maybe a bit less romantic, a bit more as it comes into the sort of heavier, weightier kind of middle years of their story.
Yeah. And in terms of your research process, because there's such a dearth of information and archival footage, how did you begin that process of narrowing down what was going to be useful? And did you have access to the research team on the show throughout your pre-production process as well?
Yes. I mean, they have the amazing research department who Yeah, I mean, they have everything at their fingertips. So whatever you need, you can just email them. They'll send you some sort of digest about, whatever sort of corner of it you're sort of digging into. So that's an amazing resource, which, a show like The Crown can provide with its kind of financial muscle. And yeah, I mean, as you say, there is an awful lot to look at. There's some of the most kind of interviewed, filmed and recorded people around. Yes, I think you're right. Part of the job was, in a way, kind of filtering information and trying to choose what you were going to focus on, what you were going to kind of maybe draw out. But the odd thing about them is, even though there's a huge amount of footage and a huge amount of published words about them, I think it's true of both Philip and the Queen that they don't really self-reveal very much. It's never confessional. They very rarely express kind of personal feelings or personal opinions. So the job of kind of imagining into what they're really like, what are they like in their marriage, what are they like at breakfast, what are they like behind closed doors, that still remains the kind of central challenge and excitement of the show. And talking to audiences is definitely and also myself as an audience know that those are the bits that are have a real thrill to them in the show. Is those sort of small, quiet, domestic moments are the real heartbeat of The Crown, I think.
Yeah, and I read you talking about a 1984 interview in particular that you found very useful and watched a lot of times, and I was curious what specific details within that video and that interview you really enjoyed and kind of like pulled out for yourself.
I mean, one of the big challenges of the show is quite technical. Obviously, they have very well-known voices, all these characters. So, and you have to get close to that. You don't want it to be sort of slavish and sort of irritating to listen to, but it has to be similar enough that allows the audience to go through that into who they are in the story, and right, in a way forget about the kind of techniques of it. So yes, I found that on YouTube there's an interview of Philip in '84, which was a common. I went to back to that a lot, and there was one other Meet the Press interview in America that was pretty useful, which I got through the research department. Obviously, yeah, because I actually used the '84 one maybe more for season 4 because that was closer in age then, whereas I was looking for sort of younger versions of him, and his voice does change a bit. I think it becomes a little more mannered, a bit more the cliche that we think of as his voice later on, whereas actually looking at the stuff in the 60s and 70s, so it was a little less mannered. That was a surprise to me when I actually started to sort of listen to him in detail.
Yeah, and in terms of his actual voice, what was the specific work that you did in terms of dialect and mastering that?
Well, now you're asking the sort of the $1 million question. Yeah, I mean, we have a brilliant voice department, William Conacher and his team. So they are really good in a way at kind of, again, filtering out the noise and kind of giving you the key sounds to kind of concentrate on. Because I think there are a few key things with all of them that really kind of maybe sort of bind you into the rhythm of them and how they speak. Yeah, and then for me, it was just a question of listening to him sort of almost more than I could bear, so that you kind of go a bit nuts with it, but you kind of almost want it to sort of go into your muscles, so that there's not a kind of a mental exercise that you're just, yeah, it sort of gets into your mouth and then you can sort of forget about it, because you don't want to be doing these scenes and sort of thinking about your accent too much. Yeah. So in a way, you want it to get as natural as possible. yeah, you notice I've not given away any key secrets. But.
I also wanted to ask about your work with Polly Bennett, who is the movement coach that you worked with on the show, and the way in which she helped you find that physicality, because even just the way that, you know, you walk into a room or you get up from a chair is very specific within that character.
Yeah, Polly's help, she's brilliant actually. And yeah, again, she has an amazing ability to kind of filter down and give you kind of 3 or 4 really key things that can help you. Because often these things in the rush of a filming day, you know, you're doing a scene that you're losing the light at the end of the day. Sometimes you haven't got a huge amount of time to kind of prep. So it's quite useful to have also shorthand. Just remember 2 things that kind of just key you back into what the key things about someone's movement are and choose. So again, that kind of, we have sort of vocal touchstones, physical ones, and she was incredibly helpful about, you know, choosing what those are. Because again, you know, it's a delicate balance when you don't want it to be an act of mimicry. Because I think over 10 hours of storytelling, that would become quite tiresome to watch. And in a way, that's more in the kind of area of satire, Rory Bremner, brilliant though that is. I don't think you want to watch Rory Bremner for 10 hours tell you a story, because I think that would become, you would just be watching the mannerisms. Mm-hmm. So you want it to be close enough to who they are so that the audience can kind of relax and go, believe it. Oh yeah, that is Philip. That is the Queen. But then really you want to go through that into the feelings, the story, the emotions, the humor, whatever it is that's going on in the story, and not get in the way of that too much. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk a little bit about your on-screen relationship with Olivia Colman and kind of that immediate chemistry that the 2 of you found when you were auditioning for the role alongside her, and then how you took that and navigated their relationship, because it's such an interesting dynamic, because it's a personal relationship between the 2 of them, but it's also obviously a very professional setting as well for the 2 of them, even at home.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Olivia is one of our finest actresses, so she makes it very easy. It's interesting. I mean, we actually didn't do a huge amount of talking around it. I think we actually tried to find it kind of as we went along, for it to be quite live, so that we kind of captured it in front of a camera rather than kind of planning it too much beforehand. Obviously, we've both done our different researches, and I think we had an idea of who we were, but then, yes, it wasn't too choreographed. Mm-hmm. And so I actually, looking back, I think that helped it to keep it, I think, quite, spontaneous and alive. And also, I think we were both minded that it felt like humor was a big part of, is a big part of the Queen and Philip's relationship. So kind of flipping between that, the domesticity, how they are behind closed doors, again, the whole show is about what these people are inside the institution, and what is it like to try and be a dad in that institution? What is it like to be a mum? What is it like to be a husband or a wife? What is it like to be a son, in terms of Charles? That's the continual kind of struggle for all these people, is they're just people and they're just trying to live their lives and fulfill all those different roles that they are, as well as be, the Duke of Edinburgh, as well as be these quite ceremonial, institutional, iconic figures, and the kind of the strangeness of that, the discomfort of that, the privilege of that, all those things kind of rolled up. And I think, in terms of working with Olivia, I think I think she was brilliant at getting the kind of the playfulness of that. Mm-hmm. That they were, and sometimes they would, they're playing a role, and she's both a queen and a mum,
Yeah, and there's such an interesting dynamic as well, because it feels like at this point of his life, he's kind of, he's accepted that his position is by her side and he's not the one, stepping forward into the limelight. But there's still moments where he kind of tries to assert himself a little bit behind closed doors. So how did you think about the way you wanted that assertion to seep out in those moments?
Yes, because I think in seasons 1 and 2, there's a lot more about Philip chafing at the kind of constraints of his position. I think in season 3, you see their marriage in calmer waters, and that he's come to terms more with his position and more at ease with being, a few steps behind his wife. However, I think it is still in there, and so I certainly, wanted to find a few moments where that can feather in, and obviously you see it maybe more overtly in episode 7, where Peter sort of comes back to that theme about what Philip's relationship with his own kind of masculinity, his own sense of what he's doing with his life, his career, what he might have wanted to do, and some of those ghosts of what he's had to put aside in order to make this work, sort of come back to haunt him.
Right, particularly because he didn't grow up in it either, which I feel like you play that so beautifully, particularly in the episode with the moon landing. And I wanted to ask a little bit about that one, because I think there's a lot of beautiful moments in your performance where the rest of the family have left the television and he's still just sitting there kind of silently watching it. And you really, without using any dialogue, managed to capture a lot of his emotions and those things that he has left behind. So how did you think about the way that you wanted to pull that in for those specific scenes in that episode?
Well, I had the good fortune to work with Jess Hobbs on that episode. She directed me. She directed episodes 7 and 10 in the 3rd season. I really enjoyed working with her a lot, and she was a sort of wonderful collaborator. And so we had a lot of conversations, and it was really kind of back and forward between us and between Peter's writing. Trying to get the tone of that. And that's you mentioned those scenes with the TV, because potentially I think there was maybe some concern about whether that would work dramatically. It's just someone watching some TV, so the danger is that could be boring to watch. But I was happy with where we ended up, because hopefully you see in those moments, you see something maybe more vulnerable, more exposed than you tend to see Philip in the show. He's a pretty armoured character. I think he seems like to me, from what I read and watched, quite an armoured man. He doesn't really show his more sensitive side or his emotions very often. But obviously, with the opportunity of those sort of moments on his own, which you don't get a lot of, there's maybe an opportunity to see, what's underneath that. Does he have dreams? And then obviously he meets with this extraordinary event that is happening, these astronauts traveling to the moon. And Peter sort of beautifully woven those two very different events. One doesn't really, when one thinks of the moon landings, one doesn't think of Prince Philip particularly, but to sort of put those two things together and think about what Philip might have felt. Now, I have no idea what he really felt about that, but Peter's used it as an opportunity to go again to look at what does an alpha male, a man of action, someone who would have had a long and probably very successful career in the Navy, all of which he put aside. Where does all that go in a man like that? And we were able to sort of explore some of that underbelly of Philip in those moments.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to ask a little bit about Helena Bonham Carter and kind of the enjoyably fractious relationship between the two of them, and whether that process was similar to what you were saying with Olivia, where the two of you just kind of did your work and found it in the moment, or if there was any sort of different approach between the two of you?
Yeah, it was different with her. I mean, I actually don't get a huge amount of screen time with Helena, as Margaret, regrettably. However, I mean, I think you're right, actually, that you do get a sense of the sort of the friction between the two of them. No, I mean, actually, what's interesting about working on a show like this is all the, I think all of us have our different ways of working, and Helena's very different to Olivia. Actually, we did have numbers of conversations about stuff and would sort of plot things out and kind of plan beforehand. Even, there weren't that many moments, but even if it was just also just kind of sharing ideas for other stuff. She's a big researcher, does a lot of reading. And so, so that was a sort of different way of working. It's interesting, the different kind of bits of the family. Working in different ways.
Yeah. I also know that you've talked a little bit in the past about how you're actually someone that loves to approach a script and look at where the superfluous pieces of language are, and you actually prefer taking lines away than adding them. So I was curious if working on this show was something that really naturally lent itself to the way that you like to work anyway.
Yes. I mean, the truth is, I would say on this show much less than I've known before. Because Peter is a very, very fine writer. And also, interestingly enough, a sort of couple of weeks before you come to shoot a scene, Peter usually takes a pass at whatever's coming up in those weeks to shoot, and will often do a kind of bit of an edit on them anyway. So some of those lines that I would be kind of like, I think I could do without that, he would actually fill it out anyway. So that was happening regularly. I mean, there was still some stuff that I would email Peter or his team about and kind of ask a question or raise. And yes, and sometimes they would be in the area of, I'm not sure I need to say that, the sort of cliche of, I think I can do it in a look, or I feel like it's there. Do we? But remarkably little with this show because, I mean, both Peter's writing and also the team that are working with him and kind of, even right up to when you're shooting, it's kind of in constant conversation. So a bit of that, but much less than normal because,
I also loved, I was reading an interview from when you'd been working on Outlander where Katrina was talking about the way that you really love to just kind of take the lines apart and really just kind of question everything and get to the meat of like what's important and the way that you study it. And I was just curious kind of what that process looks like when you're sitting with a script before you're even on set, before you're in conversation with everyone else, and the way that you work with the text yourself.
I do that a lot. I think it's my main way of working. I suppose to boil it down to its basics, it's something in the area of, I suppose, wanting to dig in to or give the lines some kind of roots so that it's not just a line that you're remembering, that it's coming from somewhere that's maybe a bit deeper. So be that kind of linking it to the event that you're referring to and kind of imagining what that was, like previous circumstance kind of stuff, or whether it's just giving it some kind of, maybe even some references from your own life that give it a bit of heat or something, or give it a bit of texture. Anything, I suppose, that makes it more personal, that makes it more like a real person, I guess. Cause whenever we speak, as whatever we say comes from a reservoir of our lives and our experiences and our memories, and all those things kind of color how we say, how we talk, the timbre of our voice. All those things mix in, and so as much as you can kind of layer those things into the lines that you're saying, I think can give, hopefully to give it a sort of a texture that feels maybe more real. So I think it's sort of that kind of area. And also, I suppose, I also like to kind of turn things over and like, what is the opposite? What would it be like if the scene didn't start like that? Where have I come from? What if I, even if, what happens if you're telling someone you hate them, but you say it in a way that you love them? What does that do to the line? There's lots of things that can bring greater complexity to a scene beyond just the lines. How you say the line can, in a way, can entirely change the tone or texture of a scene. Much to the chagrin of writers, but we have that power to, and I think, that I've always been excited by that. I'm excited by actors who do that, who bring unexpected things to a scene, or will say something in a way that you just had never thought of or never imagined, but it's thrilling. You go, oh God, that suddenly opens up a whole other set of possibilities, or a whole other idea of who this person is, or so that kind of textual kind of digging around and kind of just sort of shaking of the lines just to get them loosened up, so that I feel like as much as you can do beforehand, then when you do get on set to film, then I think you can go in maybe more directions if you need to. If the scene if it doesn't feel right in this way, you can then go, what if we do it, flip it, go in a different direction, do it in a different way. And obviously with shooting, sometimes you have to be able to do that quickly. You don't have a lot of time to kind of really rewire it. So being kind of having some different routes through the scene, being able to be dexterous like that, it certainly helped me out at different times. I mean, most of the time, that no one really knows that's the work you've done, and maybe it's not even visible sometimes. But it's what gets me up in the morning, what I enjoy doing, and I'm a bit of a geek like that. So.
Given how much you love, specifically the craft in working on The Crown, were there any kind of particular elements of your craft as an actor that you felt like it gave you the opportunity to really expand and evolve as an actor?
I think what's been great about The Crown is the technical aspect of it, the physicality and the voice. The sort of thrill of seeing certain bits where you kind of go, oh yeah, that does really kind of look a bit like him, or that really does sound a bit like him. And for me, when I watch it, I can see it kind of coming in and out of focus. Some bits are better than others in my mind, But that's a real thrill, and I've not done that before. And what's interesting about it is it gives you a real structure. So when you come to the scenes, you already have 3 or 4 tools that you're working with already. And it is interesting that you, again, talking about sort of opening lines up and different ways of saying them, as soon as you're sort of imagining yourself into the mind of a real person, I think you feel a certain amount of responsibility for that. But yes, I find myself thinking about responses to stuff or how to say lines, which I, Tobias, wouldn't have thought of. But I kind of go, oh yeah, that's, and so already that's helping you, it's sort of, so that was a really rich thing. And I was, really, I just wanted to get close to it. I wanted to sort of, because I think when you watch, when I watch seasons 1 and 2, it's really thrilling when you see the actors get close to them. It's kind of like, God, that's really like them, and it's a bit magical.
Yeah, well, it's been such a joy watching you on the show, and I'm excited for whatever point we make it to season 4. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this today.
It's really nice to chat to you. Thanks for your questions.